Salutations Rangers, General Rally 101, back again with some more lore. It's been a while since we talked about Horus and his horsey, so today we're going back to the world of 30k. And we're going to talk about an event that in my opinion is pretty underrated, mainly because it's overshadowed by what came after it. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the worst battle in all of Warhammer 40k. The battle for Beta Garmon. Now, I know some of you may be saying, hold up Brad, what you talking about? The Siege of Terra exists. But that's why I believe that this is the most overlooked and overshadowed part of the 40k universe. That being, the Siege of Terra and the Battle for Beta Garmon are often considered to be basically on par, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, in terms of the sheer amount of destruction they involved. And most people forget that, because as I said, the Siege of Terra is the most important battle, but that doesn't mean it's the most bloodiest. But as I said, Battle Beta Garmon, Battle Siege of Terra are basically comparable to one another. But there is one point in which case the Battle of Beta Garmon is in fact significantly worse than anything in the Siege of Terra. That being the sheer amount of titans and other god-class engines that were involved in the fight. So much so, that it's said that on every single battlefield of Beta Garmon, all 100 of them, titans were involved. As you can imagine, with all that heavy metal walking about, many of them did indeed fall, which resulted in one of the two other names for the Battle of Beta Garmon, that being Titan Death, or the Titan Death. The other, if you were wondering, was simply known as the Great Slaughter. So yeah, saying this was bad is pretty fair, and in my opinion, I think this is worse than the Siege of Terra in terms of the sheer amount of destruction involved. Sure, Terra was 100% the more important and the more significant of the battles, but Terra is just one world after all, and there's only so much destruction that can go on with one world. Beta Garmon, however, well, there's a whole lot of worlds, and all of them were absolutely filled with death and chaos. But then again, that is just a personal opinion. But what is a fact is that the Battle for Beta Garmon was one of the bloodiest affairs to ever occur, and involved so much death and destruction that it permanently crippled the Titans of the Adeptus Mechanicus. So ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're going to be talking about today, as I want to shed some light on the Titan Death of Warhammer 40k. Also, Titan Death? God damn, so good. But with any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get cracking on with today's video. So before we can get talking about that, context and build-up. Fast forward to a council made up of a Roman, an artist, as well as an angel. Because ladies and gentlemen, Imperium Secundus just realized that Imperium Primus is still a thing. So they decide, right, enough of that jazz, we gotta go and help Dad. Thus they begin trying to navigate the Rune Storm. Mr. Loga, I did not touch that kid Aurelian, may have fucked up a couple things, but the one thing he did get right was the Rune Storm. And lo and behold, the three of them end up on Davin. Davin, for those who don't know, is the world in which Horus fell. Very important as you can imagine. Basically, a lot of bullshit happens involving demons, traitors, and a whole lot of death and cyclonic torpedoes. In the end, Davin gets kablooied, and this would actually lead to a straight path for them to get out of the Rune Storm. However, there is a bunch of traitors standing in their way, so the three of them decide only one of them can get through, so the other two will run defense and interference. And lo and behold, they decide that Mr. Sangy Boy is going to be the one to draw the lucky straw, with Gilman being the shield to block the traitors and the lion being the sword to scour traitor worlds. Thus, the angel is able to make it all the way to Terra, and participate in the Battle of Beta Garmon and subsequently the Siege of Terra. It's at this point that Dawn ends up having a discussion and realizes there is so much giant heavy metal running about on Horus' side that if he's able to bring all of this to bear on Terra, it is going to be devastated beyond repair. Thus he decides he needs to bleed the traitors. He needs to stall them as long as possible, sapping away their strength, to give Lion and Gilman enough time to catch up with Horus. Basically, time is against the War Master, and Dawn wants to play that card all the way to high hell and back. It's then when he comes up with a plan for Beta Garmon. Plan not to win, but a plan to buy time. The Wolf King, Leman, fuck nerds Russ, is like, yeah, no, not gonna happen. So he grabs about 50,000 worth of his boys as well as all the ships they can muster, and he goes on a direct line to meet Horus and beat him in a 1v1. Armed with the Spear of Russ, which was handcrafted by the Emperor himself, one of the very few weapons that can actually hurt the bastard, he decides to fight the only way he knows how, by taking the offensive and bringing low the tyrant. There is a massive naval engagement that ensues with an even bigger boarding action, in which the wolves manage to get onto the Vengeful Spirit. But the Vengeful Spirit is no longer just a ship. The Vengeful Spirit is now Horus' domain. Basically, there's a lot of bullshit going on with overlapping corridors, lots of fleshy nonsense, and it's just a mess. However, Eventually, Leman would be able to find Horus on the bridge and duel his brother. The two are very evenly matched. At this point, Leman realizes that there's only one way he's going to get a stab in at Horus, and that's to take a stab in himself. So he basically trades with Horus, him getting absolutely fucked up, losing one of his hearts in the process and lots of life. But he's able to impale Horus with the Spear of Russ. Problem is though, this does not work as it should, because at this point there's so much chaos and nonsense going up with him that half of his soul is not there, so it doesn't have the full effect that it needs to. And Horus is able to reconstitute himself and tries to murder Leman. Space Wolves, seeing this happen, decide to literally throw themselves berserker style at Horus. Hundreds, if not thousands of wolves literally sacrificed life, limb, and every goddamn thing in between to save the Wolf King from the hands of his corrupted brother. Eventually, however, they'd be able to get off the ship, and Leman Russ would be saved before falling into a coma, at the cost of over 80% of the Space Wolf force. The wolves had been utterly decimated, and essentially that would be their last act of the heresy. But then we go back to Beta Garmon. Beta Garmon is basically the gateway into the heart of the Imperium, Terra, and the Sol System. Thus, the White Scars as well as the Blood Angels are deployed, alongside their Primarchs, as well as countless Imperial army personnel, not to mention the largest concentration of Titans that the Heresy or ever had ever seen. Now you may be thinking, oh yeah, since Dawn doesn't want to win this, he's not going to put everything in there, and that is where you'd be wrong. The Battle of Beta Garmon, up until that point, was the most pivotal part of the Heresy. It's not just Dawn who thinks so, Malcador the Sigillite as well. The second man of the Imperium, right hand of the Emperor, also knows that this is going to be a turning point for the Imperium's fate. And the two of them literally discuss this in the opening part of the bloody book. Speaking of which, taken from Titan Death. The spires of the Phalanx formed a cityscape as glorious as any once boasted by Terra's orbital plates, now all the more impressive for lack of suitable comparators. The plates were gone, or changed as part of Terra's transformation to Fortress World. Only one remained that rivaled the Phalanx, and its beauty was much curtailed. Its towers cropped back to take heavy guns, and its adornments buried beneath walls of rockcrete. Rogel Dawn had not set foot upon his immense flagship for months, being occupied with the fortification of the Throne World. But the time had come to ascend into orbit, if but for a while, for the defense was giving way to attack. In the high orbits of mankind's homeworld, and about its lonely moon, a vast armada was taking shape. The blood-red and bright white vessels of the Blood Angels and White Scar Space Marine legions at its core. Terra's battered orb gleamed before the oculus of Lord Dawn's personal observation deck, high upon a tower of the Phalanx's spine. In a few precious places, the fragile signs of rebirth engineered by the Emperor clad Terra's tired grayness in a fuzz of green and blue mirrors of infant oceans, painstakingly coaxed back into being reflected soul's light. The sun shone as it always had, and would for 1 billion more years. Man had little purchase upon its fiery orb, but the world that was Earth had suffered under mankind's dominion, and what little reparation that had been made was at risk. My father's work is under threat, as never before, said Dawn to Malcador, the sole other occupant of the chamber. This is the moment the enemy dare the walls. My brother Horus is at Beta Garmon. He's out the outmost gates of the city. The end is near. The deck was wide, circular, with an unbroken window the height of several men making up the majority of the wall. So clear and perfect was the glass side composing it, that if the bronze plasteel dome was ignored, it seemed that the chamber was open to the naked void. Your fondness for metaphors has never been more apt, I'm afraid to say, said Malcador. How you manage to maintain a light spirit in all this is your greatest gift, Dawn said. We all do as we are, old man. I was a Castellan long before I was a Praetorian. Beta Garmon is the gateway to Terra. If Horus takes the subsector. He paused and drew in a deep, weary breath. When Horus takes Beta Garmon, the way will be wide open. The race reaches its conclusion. Gilliman comes from the east. The lion lays waste to the enemy's holding. Horus must make his move soon, or he will fall. He knows this, and so he will rush. Then, he will make mistakes. If only he could be stopped before he reaches Terra, said Malcador. Dawn looked down at the sigillite. We both know that he will come here, said Dawn. The question is when. The task is not to stop him, but to slow him. We can weaken him at Beta Garmon. If he can be brought to a halt before the walls of the palace, my brother will come and trap him. Dawn gestured out at the cancerous smear of the Imperial Palace, clinging to the highest mountains of the world. Horus's forces are as battered as ours. Though greater in number, they abandon discipline for the barbarism of their new gods. They fragment. Sanguinius says Rebute's legion remains close to full strength, and his other forces are numberless. Not even Horus can resist the Ultramarines. His grip on my traitorous brother's egos will only last so long. If Horus is delayed, then he will lose, even if he breaches the walls of the palace itself. The calculation is then what damage will be done and what can be prevented. We will win. I will not consider the possibility of defeat. It is the manner of the victory we achieve that troubles me. He walked closer to the Oculus, turning away from Terra to the armada of ships gathering around Luna. Sanguinius and the Khan are ready to depart. The great muster is underway at Beta Garmon. Thousands of ships, hundreds of regiments, dozens of Titan legios. Forces loyal to my father gather all over the Imperium. They will ensure that Beta Garmon is Horus's final victory. Malcador walked to the Primarch's side, his staff typing quietly on the granite floor. We will pay a heavy price for this action, he said. We will lose many resources in challenging Lupercal, and it is regrettable that the cluster will be ruined in the process. The number of Titan legios present there alone guaranteed devastation to every world. The realm of Beta Garmon has proven to be most useful to the Emperor these last centuries. Every planet lost is a despicable shame. But this is total war, said Dawn. Beta Garmon sits upon a confluence of stable warp routes, a blessing for 5,000 years. They are a curse to those worlds now. They offer the fastest route to Terra. The Garmon cluster is the key to victory to whoever holds it. It is already lost to us, but in attacking it, Horus has left no room to maneuver. He has no space to outwit us. We know where he is. We know what he is doing. His options are limited, so his genius for strategy is a lesser advantage. He must come through Beta Garmon. If we can hold the core system, retake Nightcrown City perhaps, the front will be stabilized. Not forever, but the longer the better. Sanguinius and the Khan must buy Rebute time. I would gladly sacrifice many more than the worlds of the Garmon cluster for that. Many, many more. He looked at the gathering fleet. The armies of the War Master attack the Garmon cluster with unmatched fury. He pushes at us. Dawn's eyes narrowed. It is time the Imperium pushed back. So to say that the Battle of Beta Garmon was bloody important is like saying the sun is just a little bit bright and the ocean just a little bit wet. Now some of you may be asking, alright Brad, I get it. Lots of forces, makes sense. But why in particular was this battle so incredibly filled with Titans? What led to this battle? What led to this being the Titan death? So it's important to know that at this time, Mars is still technically underneath traitor banners. Not to mention, the system of Beta Garmon was one of the most developed places outside of Terra itself. As Dawn said, it's basically the gateway. For those of you who are familiar with anything regarding history or geography or kingdoms, nation states, whatever you want to call it, development starts at the center, the capital, and emanates outward. Thus, the most developed systems are the ones right in the middle or around the capital. Beta Garmon is basically the front door to the source system, meaning that it was incredibly developed. There were several industrial worlds as well as mustering grounds and fortress worlds there. Fun fact, it was used as a mustering point for the Retribution fleet for Prospero. It also had a bunch of Dark Age technologies going on, with the agri-world of Delta Garmon being protected by such technologies. What exactly that is, the Lord Almighty knows. But the Beta Garmon cluster itself was incredibly important. But you'll notice there are no Forge Worlds in the system. There were places that got close to it, but not exactly enough. So then, why on earth was there so many Legio Titanicus as well as Paladin Knight houses? Simple. Because there were so many traitor titans. You see, the Titans as an organization, known as the Collegica Titanica, were pretty unified. Of course, each Titan Legion held its own loyalties towards ForgeWorld, but they were all united by the idea of them being the avatars of the Machine God. They were indeed God Machines, the greatest manifestation of the Omnissiah, the Motive Force, as well as the Machine God into one cohesive element. Fun fact for you all, the Machine God, the Omnissiah, and the Motive Force are basically the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost in the Trinity of traditional Christianity. Yeah, 40k takes a lot of inspiration from Christianity, if you couldn't fucking guess. But basically the shattering of the legions, as well as the whole Horus Heresy, split the Imperium across every single avenue. It also resulted in a bunch of treachery. God Machines, Titans, are incredibly valuable and important. Thus, if one of them happens to accidentally go kablooey, you're gonna be very, very upset. And Titan Legios always have been and always will be infamous for dare if they die to anything that isn't a Titan. Even worse if it's a Titan by a betrayal. You do not want to piss off a princess, and they are notorious for being incredibly easy to piss off. I mean, when you pint a giant fuck-up robot, I guess you can be a little arrogant. And when you consider that the Horus Heresy was the very definition of the word betrayal, there was a bunch of very big angry robots that were very upset and ready for payback. And this whole cycle of vengeance led to why there were so many legions, both on the traitor and the loyalist side. A prime example comes from one of the opening chapters of the book, where Legio Solari is there because they want to face up with Legio Vulpa, with the Princeps of the Elite Titan actually arousing her Titan's machine spirit by telling her, hey, Vulpa's here, let's go kick some ass. Now some of you may be looking at me saying, surely not, Brad, surely not. The Imperium is so politically fractious that this is the deciding factor of when to deploy units. And to that I say, yeah, no, they kind of very much are. For those who don't know, the Imperium's military kind of functions very close to 18th century Napoleonic. It's that weird point to professional armies are the standard, but there's still a whole lot of nonsense going on with nobility and orders and all that rock. So we then get this sort of hybrid system. Politics always have been, and always will be, incredibly important to any military. Sure, you can do what is right, but if people around you don't like it, they're gonna make it incredibly difficult for you to do your job. When dealing with humans, you always gotta make sure that everybody is happy. Essentially, you gotta cut a deal with everyone involved. Not exactly the most noble, but that's how humans work. If everybody's happy, everybody works together. If one person is pissy, everything fucks up. But this isn't a philosophy channel. We talk about big stumpy robots here. Thus, the Imperial Coalition is there for one reason and one reason alone: to stop Horus. Or rather, I should say, to delay Horus. Because, fun fact, the Battle of Beta Garmon can be divided into two different phases. The first phase, essentially, is a pseudo half-conquest of Horus by most of the Beta Garmon system. Where this book, Titan Death, takes place, the Imperials are actually attacking Horus. They are trying to fight him over the system, which kind of makes sense when Dawn says, hey, it's time we push back. Basically, you got Nykron City. Nykron City is essentially the capital city of the capital world of Beta Garmon 2. And in the first phase of this battle, this was the main site of the fight. Basically, you had a bunch of Imperial Fists and Salamanders, yay Sally represent, as well as Solar Auxilia regiments, as well as Mechanicus Tagmata. And they were there fighting the traitor forces, composed mainly of Alpha Legionnaires as well as Emperor's children. Not to mention, lots of Titan legions, including the premier traitor Titan Legion, Legio Mortis. The Imperial forces were able to give Horus a good fight, but the traitors definitely had the edge, mainly because there were so goddamn many of them. The Imperium may have had more forces technically, but they were all spread out. The traitors were able to concentrate their numbers, and that led to a very lopsided engagement. Thus, at the end of the first phase, the traitors were looking on top. But that is when the second phase began, which was Sanguinius leading the coalition together with the Khan, and not to mention, a whole hell of a load of Titans. Yet, the Angel, whilst the most beloved of the Primarchs, didn't really have everything his way. He had to wrangle the goddamn Titan Legios who wanted blood. And everyone's favorite Golden Hawk boy muses as such to First Captain Raldoron, taken from Titan Death. Ahead was the reality-defying bulk of Nicron City. The void shields had collapsed around large parts of it, and the mountainous hive was under vicious bombardment from the fleet. Huge rents had opened in the side. Fires burned unchecked over hundreds of levels. Its defense layers were mercilessly targeted by the Imperial fleet, but its galleries housed thousands of artillery pieces that showered the plains with explosive scatterings of metal, and the bastions of its walls was replete with the armaments of fallen guard engines. He watched it all with a Primarch's wisdom, asking his pilots to bank one way or another so that he could better examine details. He did not approve of what he saw, but war was not a matter of best circumstances. If one could choose the moment, disposition of forces, and field of conflict, then there would be no war at all, he reminded himself. From a Vox emitter mounted in his collar, a steady stream of reports came in from his fleets and armies. The attack on the Anvil had begun. Ascalon had already penetrated the outer defenses of the docks. Amit fought upon the Voidal ramparts. The fleet saw off probing attacks from traitor flotillas. Measured by the standards of the day, the battle was going well. But the standards of the day were dire. The size of Horus's armies and Beta Garmon cluster had shocked him. If this had been a compliance, they would have retreated and re-evaluated their plans. They simply did not have that option. His sons thought the situation perilous too. Raldoron stood at Sanguinius' side. There was just enough room for the Equerry to see past the golden armored Primarch down to the battle, and he had formed his own opinion. "This is not an optimal strategic choice," said Raldoron, seeing something of what his gene father saw. "There are war machines dying down there that should be on Terra. We gain nothing by committing so many Titans to this battle. We shall lose more than we need for the city of questionable strategic value." "You are correct, First Captain." While Raldoron needed his helm's voxmeter to be heard over the wind, Sanguinius did not. He was helmless and spoke quietly, but his voice was heard by Raldoron and all the other blood angels within the ship, a touch of soul to soul that sound played no part in. "This is the only way. The Titan Legios bicker. We hardly have control over the situation in Beta Garmon. We lead a fragile coalition. Horus has fear and fanaticism to weld his armies together. In the divisive forces, further division is the worst solution. Here, together, the Legios have purpose and share risk equally. This strategy serves more than tactical needs, but addresses the agencies of morale and politics." Raldoron made a divisive noise that his golden helm amplified. Sanguinius glanced at him, before returning his attention to the battlefield. "I know well your dislike for politics, but although you were made for war, you are wise enough to know that war itself is only an extension of the political, and a civil war is the most political of all kinds." "Was it politics, my lord, that brought about this ruination? I thought it was treachery." "It was," said Sanguinius, choosing to ignore Raldoron's challenging tone. "Though the politics of gods, it was politics still. Lord Dawn was right to send the bulk of the Titan Legios here. Can you imagine this carnage upon the surface of Terra? It is better that they fight and die here than extinguish each other before the palace. There would be precious little left if the whole of the Collegica Titanica were to settle its differences within the sight of my father. These engines were always overmighty. Did you not ever question the concentration of such power in the hands of the Mechanicum?" "Politics," said Sanguinius sadly. "You are a space marine. You are killers of men. They are the shatterers of worlds. Each thing has its place." He paused. "But you think them ill-disciplined, and that they may be more effectively deployed?" "Yes, my lord," admitted Raldoron. "That is so, but do not blame them. These legions are too fractious, only because they wish to survive. They too have had their brotherhoods and their bonds. They look upon the prospect of battle of this kind, and they see their order's annihilation. They, like we, do not care for their own lives. They are faithful, worthy, and mightier than most men of any sort, but they are still men and women, and need to be treated as such. They accept gladly their own loss, or even the loss of all their kind. But no one can easily sacrifice themselves while others are left unscathed. None of them would have agreed to commit themselves fully if their peers were given other duties. This is a fight so great a magnitude, an extinction of machines. It undermines their discipline and sense of duty. You say they are strong. The guard engines are, but their weakness is human. There is weakness in all the works of men, yourself and myself included, said Sanguinius, rousing a little. Neither you nor I would gladly sacrifice our own legion for another without firm cause. If asked to lay down our lives to the last space marine while our brothers and other legions were kept to one side, we too would deem it unfair and cruel. He looked out over the wrecked plains. That kind of thoughtlessness helped us into this hell. Would Perturabo have turned if his legion had been shown a little more consideration? Would Mortarion if his ego had been paid a touch more care? Curse too would have been capable of less harm had his madness been addressed. And it should have been. But it was not. We were made to be the lords of men. Our father trusted us too much to solve our own problems, and we fell too short of his vision. Raldoron was shocked by his father's insights, and would have deemed them close to treasonous if they had not been uttered in so measured a way, or by so perfect a being. Sanguinius saw this, as he saw Raldoron's unswerving loyalty and his love. It pained the Primarch to know that Raldoron and many others would have followed him into damnation if he had chosen the other path presented him. That his legion marches so faithfully towards a different sort of hell sickened Sanguinius. But there was no other way. We followed the Emperor's lead, my lord, said Raldoron. Look not to the Emperor and expect perfection. My father is mighty and good and wise, but he is a man. Nobody is infallible. Such false faith gave us certainty where there was none. Then perhaps he should have discouraged our faith, said Raldoron. He tried, said Sanguinius. He looked to the sky. The sun was a smear in the yellow, against which attack craft swarmed like moths battering against a curtain case deep into the night. He smiled with bitter inner knowledge. Hubris is a trap for us all. That is the last certainty when all others are gone. There are no more certainties in this galaxy, my son. Only hubris. And only war. Whilst I expunged that this was a lot of politics and bloodshed and vengeance, Sanguinius completes the other side of that coin. The Titan legions wanted to fight. They were faithful, but they were also tired. So too that the Siege of Terra was the final culmination of legions, of shattered brother against shattered brother. So too was the Battle of Beta Garmon, the final bout for many Legios of the Titanicus. Here, all grievances would be settled, oaths of bonds of loyalty proven anew, and here would be the death of many Titans. For they were tired, absolutely tired. They had fought and fought and fought, but now was the chance for all of them to fight together, for each Titan Legion to prove their mettle, to prove their worth before the Omnissiah, the Machine God, and the Motive Force. This was their chance. Combine that with everything else, and we finally know why there were so many goddamn Titans in Beta Garmon. Now as to the actual Battle of Beta Garmon itself, we get into the second phase. This is where the Titan death occurred. As I said, Titans were pretty much everywhere all over the Beta Garmon system. However, their main concentration were in the capital world, that being Beta Garmon 2, and the capital city, that being Nicron City. Fleets engaged in fleets. Titans engaged in Titans. It is said that at the height of the fighting, the sheer amount of Titans on the field of battle were deployed in such a way you would think they were infantry formations, rather than guard machines. On every world, be it Alpha Garmon 9, Omega Garmon 8, or Theta Garmon 5, Titan legions and night houses fought each other again and again and again, bleeding and dying. Yet at the very height on the capital system of Beta Garmon 2, Sanguinius would lead a force of Blood Angels and nearly 30 Titan legions to finally completely recapture the world from Horus. There, at the capital city of Nikron, they were met by an equally massive traitor force. It is said there that over 1,000 Titans fought on the tainted fields of Beta Garmon. Over the course of this battle, it is said that so many engines had littered the field that many who saw it only referred to it as Titan Death. At the very height of the battle, Sanguinius, as well as his elite sanguinary guard, descended via aerial assault to board the Traitor Imperator Titan, Axis Mundi. After successfully boarding it, they were able to destroy it from the inside out. Yet despite this, it is said that 5 times the Loyalist Titans assaulted the traitor defenses of Nikron City, and 5 times were they thrown back. During this time, Ascalon of the Blood Angel would also lead an assault on the star fort orbiting Beta Garmon 2, known simply as the Anvil. This was said to be where the bulk of the traitor reserves were hiding, including Horus himself. However, when Ascalon discovered the city, he only saw a few Sons of Horus Space Marine, as well as their accompanying cultists. It was then realized that he had been played. Ascalon and the Blood Angels would quickly depart from the Anvil, before eventually it was detonated, taking the remaining traitors with it. The resulting debris showered the surface of Beta Garmon, landing on both friend and foe alike, adding more to the Titan death. It was here that the Loyalists realized they had been duped. The aim of the War Master was not Beta Garmon 2, but Beta Garmon 3. Beta Garmon 3 was home to the Loyalist Communication Center, known as the Collegica Titanica. Basically, if Horus could take Beta Garmon 3, then the already spread thin Loyalists would be without the means to communicate with one another, leaving them easy pickings for the traitors. Thus, Horus began the battle by detonating a vortex bomb in the atmosphere, creating a terrible storm around the Caldera Primus. With the world now beset by a constant toxic storm, its void shields would soon fail, leaving it utterly defenseless. There, Horus leading a massive army of his Sons of Horus and well over 100 Titans of the Legio Mortis, the world would be assaulted with no quarter. In the end, Beta Garmon 3 would be taken. However, Horus would not survive the battle unscathed. But whilst he was now wounded in the fight, as the wound in which the Wolf of Fenris dealt to the Wolf of Luna had somehow been reopened, causing Horus to fall into a coma. It was at this point that Sanguinius realized that the jig was up. The gambit to buy time had reached its ultimate conclusion. If they stayed any longer, they would have been picked off and destroyed. Thus, the remaining Loyalist forces were quickly gathered and managed to escape back to Terra. The traitors, with Horus out of commission, had no one to coordinate their efforts, and soon resulted to bickering amongst themselves, giving a much-needed reprieve for the Loyalists to make it back to the throne world. Yet the final battle of Beta Garmon 3 is notable not only for the fact that so many Titans were deployed, but also for the type of Titans, because it wasn't just the corrupted guard engines of Legio Mortis that took to the field. This is also one of the first ever accounts we have of demonically possessed warlord Titans, particularly from Legio Vulpa. The Horus Heresy had changed many man into demon, but it was here that we would truly see the corruption of chaos reach its ultimate zenith. For on the world of Beta Garmon 3, the gods of the Omnissiah became the devils of chaos. Taken from Titan Death. Archek and the other altered Titans marched directly at the defense lines alone. Protoss had arrogantly committed them to this fight as a demonstration of their power. They were the line breakers, sent to open a way up the mountain for those that came behind. 8 warlords were inadequate for this task. Before the ritual, Archek would have refused, but a bloody recklessness had him. The result of the battle didn't matter to him. Only the fight, the chance to spill blood and take heads. Such pleasure filled him as the Titans neared the lines, wild, uncaring, and free of thought. The storm hid them until they were 10 kilometers out. Thereafter, the defenses of the Collegica Titanica opened fire. Thousands of guns spoke, Wide shots slammed into the water sheeting on the lower slopes. Many hit home, but the void shields held, shining a new ruddy light where they were struck. Leering demonic faces scudded over the energy skin, jaws wide to consume the ordnance falling through the rain. "Forwards!" Artek roared in his mind. His titan screeched, a sound no warhorn should be able to produce. The other 8 screamed with him, their raging voices a weapon in themselves that shattered falling shells and sent shockwaves through the rain. "Forwards!" he called again. Artek was raging, shouting nonsense. There was no coordination between the 8. There was no mana pull, but a collection of mighty machine champions. They held their fire until they were close, but when the first let fly with a barrage of rockets, the rest followed suit, and the space between the titans and the wall was filled with a violent light traded between towers and god engines. Nuntio Dolores was angered that it was not the first to fire, and increased speed to be the first at the walls. Laser blasters and volcano cannons fired simultaneously at the tower. Alarms blared all over the Casella as the reactor spiked dangerously, but neither Artek nor the Titan cared about the stress. Void shields collapsed around the bastion, and it trained its own guns on the approaching warlord. Artek screamed violent words from languages he did not know. As soon as the volcano cannon was charged again, he fired it, though more klaxons blared, warning of overheating and the damage it could cause the gun. Artek sidestepped the tumble of rubble slipping down the hill, leading his machine into the rising slope. There was no divide between he and the creature bound to the Titan. They were one. He felt the body of the machine as his own, every drop of rain that hit his armor, the slip of the mountainside as he climbed upwards, the pressure in the Titan's hydraulic tubing, and the play of the motor force down every cable. He knew it better than his own body. He laughed madly, carried away with the sensations filling him, urged on by the need to spill blood. "Protoss! Protoss!" he cackled. "Had you told me what you had for me, I would have said yes immediately." Only one of their number had succumbed to the enemy. It burned as it walked under heavy fire, before finally succumbing and falling down. For a moment, it lay still, and then something in it gave. A sheet of fire roared skywards. For a moment, it was a face screaming out a mix of frustration and joy at release. Then nothing but scattered lightning racing off through the yellow clouds. "He does not care," Artek said giddily. "He does not care from whence the blood flows." You could hear the reactor. All the lights were off. No device functioned. "This is impossible," he said. The machine heaved. He recognized the motion as readily as if it was his own. It was trying to stand, pushing against something heavy. It moved again, then again, each movement more violent, flinging its head, sending Artek's own head whipping back and forth. The carapace banged on something, and again there was that terrible growl. The Titan lunged, metal screeched, the growl turned into a roar. Slowly with great effort it rose. Rubble fell from its shoulders, banging loudly off the head. It lifted its face from the dirt, and the debris fell from the machine's eyes, uncovering the small window set behind the auger lenses. Pale light flooded in, allowing Artek to see. His body was encased in a shell of rigid bone, and the Casella had transformed into a semi-organic abomination. Veined membranes covered the equipment and thick liquid oozed from everything. Far arteries pulsed over instrument boards. The forward display was embedded with a film of flesh that looked to him very much like a retina, veined and iridescent. The clear images it had shown were replaced by watery reflections. The Titan was looking across the landscape. Members of the Mechanicum prostrated themselves at its feet. It looked down at its mangled limbs. The armored plates were flowing like melted wax, changing shape. Skull runes rose into them like corpses surfacing from the sea. Elsewhere, the machinery cracked, like the shell of a molting crustacean. The volcano cannon lengthened, sprouting a moist mouth that clacked arm-long fangs against metal. The fingers of the Ariok power claw split wetly, talons emerging from the ceramite that became bony, then soft, turning into a whipping tentacles that dripped with potent acid. A tail of a raw exposed bone forced itself from the rear pelvic assembly, growing a blade of horn from the tip. Hartek watched with horror. When the head changed, he began to weep. The organic mess of it pushed inwards. The back lengthened. The front shook, bent aside, and stretched outwards. To the last vestiges of the MIU, Hartek felt the change from noble armored helmet to leering, semi-metallic machine face, sporting swept-back horns. He thrashed against the bony cage holding him in place, but it would not let him go. His MIU cable mutated from banded metal to a long, tubular organ that pulsed and sucked at his mind and soul. Each attempt to free himself prompted bony needles to force themselves into his flesh, pinning him in a state of permanent, immobile agony. He tried to push them away into the MIU, but he had no influence over the being that inhabited his titan. He could see it, but it spared him no attention. He was trapped in the skull of the beast. When the eyelids blinked over the augurs and oculus, his mind cracked. Terra and Hartek screamed unashamedly. Every vestige of military control rinsed out of him in an instant, and replaced by howling insanity, as the newborn Chaos Titan raised its head to the sky and roared out its hatred of the universe. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the fate of all Chaos Titans, to some fashion at least. And so too did the Titan death end. The battle for Beta Garmon was a preemptible move. It was the calm before the storm. It goes to show just how terrible the Siege of Terra would be, that the calm was anything but. The battle for Beta Garmon, the Titan death, the Great Slaughter, whatever you want to call it, was an absolute devastation, brought not only to one world, but 100. It was the Titan death, the battle that forever changed the Adeptus Mechanicus, the battle that forever changed the Collegica Titanica and the god machines of the Omnissiah. For on that day, gods died, and devils rose in their place. But unfortunately for the gods of the ruinous powers, not all the gods of the Omnissiah had perished, and those that remained gathered themselves upon holy Terra, awaiting with bated breath and roving guns for the damned of chaos. But while Horus had won Beta Garmon, the Siege of Terra lay, and we all know how that turned out. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for watching. Let me know down below, what did you guys think about the Battle of Beta Garmon? For me, it's one of those things that it's super underrated. Not really underrated, more so overshadowed, I think is a much better way of putting it. I mean, makes sense. The Siege of Terra, super important, major important. But Beta Garmon was terrible. I like to see it as a great companion to Siege of Terra. For some could argue that during the Siege of Terra, the Imperium died. But during Beta Garmon, the Mechanicum died. Maybe I might be overreaching a little bit with that last one, but I like putting it like that. Again, twin empires of Terra and Mars, twin deaths at Beta Garmon and Terra itself. But let me know down below, what do you guys think? But I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and patrons. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Matthew Merrill, Mr. Sergeant Cossack, 68W173D, and Mr. That Guy. Shout out to my corporal tier members, Mr. Tremail the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Bowen, Shauna Smithers, The Gentle Salamander, The Wench of Warhammer, Major Doshinect, Edward King, and Mr. Overanalyze This. And finally, but absolutely not least, shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Aeda, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Portus Unum, Mr. CMD Nay, Mr. Eric Massaro, Mr. Dar Marik, Mr. Ken_Sakura333, Mr. Adrian Von Furen, Mr. Morally Bankrupt, Mr. Matthew Peter, Mr. Josh Lee 1320, Mr. Adrex X1, Mr. Ethan Elam U71, Mr. Kiri Khan, Mr. Malpace-XB1XE, and Mr. Robert Makorovich. Thank you. I love you. I appreciate each and every one of you. Sign up today with memberships, get a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, early access to these videos, not to mention get to help out your boy. But remember, this will always be free. So whether you give your boy $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah. But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Brother 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you so very much for watching. Y'all be sure to say hello there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Do you think a Sanguinius Titan grows a penis or a vagina? Or both? Yeah, it's probably both.